The best part of winning ugly, winning. The worst part of losing ugly, losing. Kansas loses against Houston 65-59. We're going to break it all down coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. As always, I'm Nick Springer, joined by Kevin Flaherty for a live edition late on Monday night after Big Monday, where Kansas basketball falls against the Houston Cougars in Houston, 65-59. Going to be breaking all that down coming up throughout the show tonight. Be sure, if you are joining us on this live edition tonight, drop a comment, share your thoughts. I already had a couple people share some comments. Russ, maybe not a fan of AJ Storr. We might get into that a little bit as well. So be sure to drop a comment, share your thoughts if you're joining us live. Thanks so much for staying up and hanging out with us late tonight after the game. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already, you should certainly do that over on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Or if you're listening after the fact on audio, you can subscribe there as well to get all of the latest episodes that we have. And we're going to be talking plenty of KU football as well. If you follow us on social media, you'll see KU football is underway in spring football. We're going to be talking plenty about that as well later this week and throughout the rest of the spring also. So definitely be on the lookout for all of that good stuff as well. But as for tonight, it was a bit of an up and down game for Kansas against Houston. It started out kind of slow a little bit. Houston was shooting the ball very poorly. Kansas was hanging around. That kind of continued towards the end of the game. And then I think Dion pretty much sums it up here. Turnovers and defensive rebounding proved to be the difference late in the game for Kansas. They were unable to get a defensive rebound late that really hurt them. Had a couple bad turnovers down the stretch that really hurt them as well. And they ultimately lose by 6. And this, to kick off this conversation, Kevin, we had talked about it leading into this game where KU could lose and you would maybe walk away feeling a little bit better. I don't really know that I necessarily feel better, I guess, but certainly you like to see that this team showed a lot of fight and hung around, right? I mean, Houston didn't play very well. Kansas didn't play very well, right? This was a definitely an ugly game, but Kansas hung in there. They were there late and just unfortunately let it slip away at the end.
Yeah, it felt like there were multiple chances for Houston to really kind of run away with this thing. You know, they would get a couple plays, a couple baskets, and you'd say, okay, here it goes. And Kansas usually had a response. And so that was a positive part. The other positive part, Nick, friend of the show, Shreyas, who writes for the Kansas City Star, wrote a great article early this season talking about how basically Kansas wasn't feasible this year. And the reason why was, you know, not only did they not make a lot of threes, not take a lot of threes, you can do that, but you have to get to the free throw line, right? And Kansas at the time was not doing any of that. And you can't win when you're not doing that offensively. Today, at least, one of the positives I thought was Kansas did a really nice job when it wasn't turning the ball over of really driving into contact, getting the ball deep into Houston's defense, forcing Houston to foul it and getting to the free throw line. And I think if you wanted to take something away from this game, not necessarily even as a positive, but something where you say, hey, what can Kansas carry over from this game that you would like to see, you know, through the rest of March, I think that would be it. You know, this isn't going to be a Kansas team that's going to make 15 threes a game. That's just not who they are. For whatever reason, though, Nick, it's a team that hasn't really gotten to the free throw line, and I think that's a team they can be. And I think that they showed that tonight. You saw KJ kind of go up soft maybe a couple times early on, not get the benefit of the doubt, and really attacked after that and forced the officials to blow the whistle. Hunter really battled, wound up turning the ball over, you know, way too often, obviously, but we brought it up on our preview show, Nick. It's really hard to beat Houston at Houston, and Houston has only lost once at home in regulation, or I guess hasn't lost at home in regulation since joining the Big 12. That's over 2 seasons They have one loss at home, and that was a 1-point loss in overtime to Texas Tech. Really tough to beat Houston there. I thought one of the interesting things to me was the way this game played out from a rebounding standpoint, and Jacob brings up the point there as well that multiple people are making. When Kansas played Houston at Allen Fieldhouse, Kansas was pretty much right there from a rebounding standpoint. Houston, I think, finished with 12 offensive rebounds, which sounds like a lot, but spread over 2 overtimes too. Kansas, I think, had 11. And so if we're basically playing equal with Houston on the offensive glass, you feel like you've got a great chance to win, and Kansas certainly had a great chance to win in that one. This is one that, quite frankly, Nick, it was almost kind of hard to figure out how Kansas was still in it, because they gave away so many possessions because of turnovers. They gave away so many extra possessions because of rebounds. And with Houston, I know at one point late, Houston had taken something like 28 more shots. I didn't see what it wound up at. 26 is what it wound up being. You're not usually going to beat somebody else when they get 26 more field goal attempts than you do.
Yeah, it helped on the free throw point that Houston was just assaulting anybody that got within 12 feet of the basket.
Kansas got 19 free throws and probably could have gotten 40, to be honest with you. Like
Houston was employing the famous Bob Huggins, West Virginia strategy of yesteryear, where if you foul on every possession, they can't call foul every single time. But yeah, so Kansas, I mean, yes, to their credit, they did get to the free throw line more, but they were helped out by what Houston was doing. And yeah, AB brings up a good point. I mean, Hunter was taking a lot of body shots all night long from Houston down low. And so that did help.
That's why that late call, the offensive foul,
the push off,
was so silly. It's like this guy's getting suplexed whenever he goes into the paint, and then you're going to call that one the other way. And I'm not saying the officiating wasn't balanced or anything like that. I'm just saying that one call was very difficult to figure out based on the way the rest of the game had been officiated up to that point.
Well, and that was a big sequence because Kansas was down 3 with the ball right about 4 minutes left. You had Hunter Dickinson kind of inexplicably throw it straight to the defense that led to a run-out dunk to make it a 5-point game. And then that offensive foul on Dickinson happened on the next possession. So you go from being down 3 with the ball to all of a sudden being down 5, and Houston gets the ball back in the span of like 15 seconds with around 3.5 minutes left in the game. That was a pretty big swing. I think for Katie at that point. So that call certainly was, I think, frustrating to watch. Somebody mentioned Rucky's Passmore here earlier, and Passmore ended up getting quite a bit of playing time.
I think the Passmore and Store conversations are linked.
Yeah. So AB brings up Passmore, asking about why did Bill Self throw Passmore out there. The answer actually doesn't lie with what Passmore was doing. The answer lies with what AJ Store was not doing, or in some cases what he was doing horribly. AJ Store, I think, is he's run his course. I think that
they like Rakis. He competes. I mean, they'd rather not have him in those situations as a freshman. But yeah, I mean, when the other guy that you would want to get those minutes is struggling to that extent, that's a rough deal. And it did kind of stink because I thought Rakis had a pretty good contest on that 3-point shot, just maybe extended just slightly too much. And it was an unfortunate deal because again, based on what had happened over the course of the game, it wasn't as much a foul as maybe some of the other stuff. Ultimately, probably wasn't the wrong call, but also wasn't a super bad play by Rakis there. He just kind of got caught.
Well, unfortunately, you foul a 91% free throw shooter in Emmanuel Sharp, so it's the equivalent of him making that 3, right? Which has ended up what happening. He makes all 3 free throws, and that was a situation where it was a 2-point game at that point as well. So, but yeah, certainly, I think the 2 biggest storylines of the game for Kansas was bad turnovers and defensive rebounding. That's really what sunk them in this game. Houston did not play very well. I mean, LJ Cryer carried them in the first half with 18 points. He then got into foul trouble. Milos Uzan was in foul trouble in the first half, and Kansas Houston was not shooting the ball well pretty much the entire night. But because of the turnovers by Kansas and the inability to get to get defensive rebounds, like you highlighted, Houston ended up with 26 more shots. If you shoot 30% from the floor, but you get 26 more shots, and Kansas is shooting 40% from the floor, it ends up balancing out. So, if you're going to have a very poor shooting night like Houston did, at least getting those offensive rebounds, sort of balances that out. But that was obviously, I think, a frustrating way to watch the game slip away late, right? Kansas still certainly had a chance late in the game. Diggy Coit hits the 3 to make it a 2-point game. And then Houston ends up getting 2 or 3 offensive rebounds down the stretch that allows them to just milk the clock and shoot more free throws and come away with the win.
Yeah, that was definitely frustrating, and it's a tough deal because when you play Houston, you have to be turned up to 11 for all 40 minutes. And I know that seems like a no duh thing, but that's a lot tougher to do in practice. If you're playing a game like that where you're getting a hit over and over again, and I'm not even saying necessarily illegally, I'm just saying how physically the game goes. It's really tough to keep up that level of competition at all times in order to keep guys off the glass. Kelvin Sampson does an amazing job there. I did think, Nick, Kansas's perimeter defense, I thought, was a lot better in the second half. I think, that was something that DeJuan did do well in a game that DeJuan did not do a whole lot, if we're being honest. Both from a scoring standpoint. He had 8 points in the game at Allen Fieldhouse, had 12 assists with 1 turnover at the game in Allen Fieldhouse. He impacted that one a lot more. This one, it felt like he was kind of out there. Like I said, he did some nice things defensively, didn't do as much as what they needed offensively, had a bad turnover or 2. And then you got to talk about Zeke Mayo, because I don't know if he's in his head or whatever. His season high in turnovers was 5, and he tied that Kansas's last game out. And in this one, he actually winds up having 6 to go with the 7 points he scored. He's really in a funk right now. And it's one thing when you're just in a shooting funk, right, where you're saying, hey, the shots aren't falling, but maybe you're doing this or that. When you're also giving away that many possessions, and between Hunter and Zeke, you had 13 turnovers between the 2 of them. That makes it really, really tough to win when your guards also aren't taking care of the basketball.
Yeah, I think you just scratched the surface on that guard conversation, and I do want to spend a lot more time diving into that, including this comment from Adarius talking about Diggy. We're going to get to that and plenty more. I do want to take a quick break, though, real fast, and that gives us the opportunity to tell you about Home Field Apparel. You can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code PAYHEAT24, 15% off your first order. You can find Kansas gear. You can find gear from 130 other plus schools as well. As the weather warms up, they've got great T-shirts. Kansas baseball is on a tear right now. You can get a pretty cool Kansas baseball Jayhawks script T-shirts that I actually have in my wardrobe. You should add it to yours as well, and you can do that at homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code PAYHEAT24. More Kansas basketball talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story. Like Bryan Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Bryan Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the Paid Podcast. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. And right before the break, Kevin, you started to scratch the surface on something that I really wanted to hone in on after the game, and that was the guard play for Kansas.
Yeah.
There was the good, the bad, and the non-existent, really, for Kansas from the guard position. You look at what Zeke Mayo, DeJuan Harris, and Rylan Griffin did, and all three of those guys were virtually non-existent. It wasn't even that they were ineffective; it's that they weren't even there to be ineffective. Zeke Mayo didn't take a shot. You mentioned him; he didn't even take a shot, Kevin, until about less than 3.5 minutes left in the first half. Rylan Griffin was non-existent. He ended with 0 points on 0-4 from the floor. You touched on DeJuan Harris again. He only attempted 2 shots, finishes with 2 points, only 2 assists and 2 turnovers. It's great to have a pass first point guard when he has 12 assists, like you mentioned in the last Houston game, but only getting 2 tonight was a bit unfortunate. And you just got nothing out of those guys. And again, I think I've mentioned this before, but in this era of college basketball, like Hunter Dickinson, obviously, I think is a great big man, one of the best big men in the country. But in 2025, you can't, I think, have sustained success with your 5-man being your one and only primary scorer. It's just not going to work. You need perimeter scoring. You need guys that can create shots, and neither DeJuan, Zeke, or Rylan could do that tonight, or seemingly had any interest in even trying to do that tonight, unfortunately, for a majority of the game, especially in the first half. Zeke got things going a little bit. He had that kind of circus shot to end the half, which I was hoping would maybe spark him a little bit. And it kind of did, I guess. Like, he ended up, getting some points on the board. But again, then you look at the negative aspect of that, it's the turnovers with Zeke. I mean, he had a couple plays where there was one where he just fell down. He steps out of bounds late in the second half. Somebody had mentioned that as well. And yeah, it was just a really, really tough game from Kansas's perimeter guards. And again, late in the game, a similar issue that we've also talked about before is late in the game, it's a 1-2 possession game, and you've got 5 guys who are all looking to pass. Nobody wants to shoot.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God Diggy was on the floor at the end of the game. He's the only one that wanted to shoot the ball and had the confidence seemingly to shoot the ball. So it's a confidence issue. I think, but I almost think it goes beyond that, I think, with some of these guys. So I don't know. It was very disappointing to see that, because Hunter, obviously, I think has really turned things up over these last couple games.
Yeah,
obviously
he's played really well.
Yeah, he had a 32-point game against Colorado. I mean, he has stepped his game up significantly. KJ Adams, of course, had a solid game on Saturday. But in this era, you need guards. You need guard play to create either opportunities to score or create potential to score from the perimeter, create your own shots. And Kansas just does not have that right now. And I want to talk about Diggy Coit too, but do you have anything else to add basically on Kansas's guards?
Well, I'm glad you put it the way you did, because if you look at the shots even that the guards did get tonight, they were shots that were created by the bigs. And so it's one thing to not have guards that score. It's another thing to not have guards who can create shots, or create shots for other players. In this specific matchup, it was a situation where the ball was touching the inside. And granted, I know that's how you attack Houston's defense, but at the same time, in that first game, DeJuan was helping to create, looks and shots and things like that. Whereas in this one, the passing was coming from the bigs. You think about the big 3 that Diggy hit, where Hunter threw like a cross-court pass basically to get him an open look that kind of got him started, and then Diggy started to get a little bit heated up. But yeah, it's really tough, and it's not just the outside shooting, Nick. How many times, and somebody brought up, I think 2016, 2017, you go back and watch that game, and it felt like multiple times a game, Frank Mason would just put his foot in the ground and get to the rim, and would get a layup and would be able to generate shots for himself, really pull the defense to him. Kansas doesn't really have that right now. They don't have a guard doing that. And you think about it, even with the night that Diggy had, where he played really well, he showed a lot of confidence. There were a few defensive lapses or what have you. But when he had the pump fake to get a guy in the air, and then he attacked the closeout, he wasn't a guy that was going to finish with all that Houston length at the rim. And so that's another thing that Kansas is missing. And we talked about AJ Storr earlier. That's what AJ was really supposed to provide, was a guy who could attack a closeout, really, attack the rim with length and athleticism, get to the free throw line, get points at the rim off the drive. And Kansas just doesn't have that type of guy, either if you want to talk traditional guards or the guys on the wings. They don't have anybody doing that right now.
Yeah, and that's been a big issue. And on the positive side, you touched on it with Diggy Coit. Diggy Coit was by far KU's best player tonight. I mean, it wasn't even close. He was phenomenal off the bench. Ends up with 14 points, 4 of 6 from 3. Somebody mentioned it. He also actually was second on the team in rebounding in the second half behind Hunter Dickinson. He was seemingly doing it all. Darius talking about Diggy starting, and I think that probably does need to be a conversation. But again, you see the positives of Diggy Coit and his confidence in shooting the ball, but unfortunately, his height really limits him. And down the stretch in the second half, Houston was basically giving the ball to Milos Uzan, getting him matched up with Diggy, and letting him, drive in and create shots. And that's easy to do when you've got a 6-inch height advantage on a guy. I love Diggy and I love my short kings, right? I mean, I'm one of them, so I get it. But there's just some real limitations, unfortunately, defensively and in other areas. But I mean, incredible heart from Diggy, incredible tenacity, an absolute dog, a great night for him. It's just unfortunate that it still came in a loss.
Yeah, for sure. I think Diggy and KJ Adams, I thought was outstanding too. When you look at the field goal percentage for KJ, wasn't great, but he actually graded out really efficiently because of the made free throws and the work he did there. He didn't turn the ball over. And then I thought, I know people tend to not focus on defensive stuff, but Jawan Roberts absolutely mauled Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. I mean, he was one of the biggest reasons that Houston won that game, and Kansas had no answer, and KJ didn't play in that game. And I thought that I think Jawan had 6 tonight on like 11 shots or something like that. And so KJ's defense was also really big, and that was a key factor in Kansas hanging around in this one too, was the play of KJ. It stinks that Hunter had the turnovers, because I agree with you. Hunter's motor has been about 8 times better over the last, 3, 4, however many games. And when Kansas came out of the Utah trip, I think there were a lot of fingers pointed by a lot of people and a lot of things said about a lot of players. And you can respond to that in a positive way. You can respond to that in a negative way. Hunter's a guy that he ratcheted things up, and you really have seen him work and battle and do all of the things from an effort standpoint that, I don't want to belabor the point, but you've kind of wanted to see from him all along, right? I mean, I think that the defensive stuff, he's been scrambling a lot more and getting to his spots better. He's really, battled and fought on the glass in some less than ideal situations. In some cases, it's felt like he's been the only guy rebounding, and he's had to go up and grab rebounds over 3 other guys. And he hasn't been having really the quiet periods that you used to see from him, where he would kind of burst, score for 6 or 8 points, and then you wouldn't hear anything from him for a while. Hunter is legitimately playing like an All-American right now, and it's unfortunate that the turnovers were there, because one, Kansas needed somebody to create it, and a lot of that creative burden fell to Hunter tonight. 2, Houston's really good at turning people over. And 3, Hunter was also put in some not so great spots in a couple of those too. But I do think that Hunter is playing about as well as you would want him to play heading into the postseason.
Yeah, I agree. I think Hunter, and I think you could lump in KJ Adams as well.
Yeah.
The two primary bigs for Kansas, I think you're right, I've been playing very well over the past couple games. It just kind of goes back to that point of, you need guards, right? You need guard play. You need somebody to step up from the perimeter, and that just hasn't happened. And unfortunately, I'm not really very confident that it's going to happen either. Like, I mean, besides Diggy, right? But again, I think Diggy has his ceiling, right? Like I think he has a pretty hard ceiling, basically, of what he's going to do on a game in, game out basis. Whereas you would love to be able to tap into what Zeke Mayo could give you. He has a much higher ceiling. Rylan Griffin, same thing. It just hasn't happened for those guys, and I don't know if it's going to happen. And one thing that I got to thinking about over the course of this game, and really just thinking about the season as a whole, Kevin, is Kansas obviously swung pretty big on some transfers and has missed this year and missed in the past couple of years. I think, to me, Hunter Dickinson has been a success as a transfer. He's been what you basically expected, I think, when you got him. But obviously you think about your Nick Timberlakes of the world, and now this year your AJ Storr and I think Rylan Griffin to a lesser extent, but you could probably throw him in there. And then I think with kind of the fall off of Zeke, maybe add him in as well. So you're talking about 3 transfers that, one, you've missed big time. Another one has been underwhelming, but not disastrous. And then the third in Zeke has been really good at times, but really bad at times. But the point being that I got to think about this is, look at Milos Uzan for Houston.
Yep.
Milos Uzan came to Houston. Kelvin Sampson had some pretty crazy comments, if you remember, going back to the preseason, saying that the program he was at, Oklahoma, was basically softer than you-know-what, and said that Milos Uzan was this really soft player, right, when he came to Houston. But Houston went out and decided, you know what, he's the guy that we think can fit, and they got him to fit. And that is where things have differed, I think, when you look at what Kansas has done on the transfer portal, where they've gone out and identified guys that they want to use, but have not been able to get them to fit. So I was really thinking about that a lot. I mean, Milos Uzan has gone from being a solid player to being a really, really, really good player with Houston. And that only took, 4 months, right? 5 months basically. And for Kansas, unfortunately, that hasn't happened with some of the guys that they've brought in. And again, without being, at Houston's practices and at Kansas's practice, without being internally within both those programs, it's hard to say why. And we've talked about it. The transfer portal is more or less a crapshoot, I think, most of the time, generally speaking. So it's hard to say that that's like some sort of really indictment of what Kansas is doing versus what Houston is doing, but it just got me thinking, right? I mean, Uzan was a guy that
Yep.
Houston went out and handpicked to basically replace Jamal Shedd, and he has turned out very, very well for them. Whereas with Kansas, they've gone out and tried to find some guys that they thought could fill the needs that they have, and it just hasn't worked out for them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Malik Wilson's another one that Houston got. I mean, he's been there a couple of years, but I think that's an interesting play, I think, for herself. And it's tough to plan multiple years in advance now with the way.
Oh, it's impossible. Yeah,
because you bring in somebody and you say, okay, this guy will be good for us 2 years down the road, and then he's not happy with playing time in the first year there and he goes somewhere else. But Houston has evaluated those guys well, and Wilson's been a nice fit for them. They've landed the odd big guy that has been kind of a plug and play for what they need, and so Houston has done a better job evaluating the transfer portal than Kansas has, and so I do think Kevin McCullough was obviously a hit. Right away he was pretty good, and then he was playing like a first-team All-American before he got hurt in his second year. And I'm not saying you even go into the portal to find stars, because I do think that that's really tough to do. I do think Kansas needs to get better at evaluating the guys who are going to play roles. And I think when you look at a guy like Rylan Griffin specifically, right? Kansas didn't expect Rylan Griffin to come in and lead this team in scoring, but they expected him to be a 3-and-D guy. Like, hey, you're going to come in, you're going to play defense from the jump, you're going to make outside shots, and that's going to make you a good fit for this roster. I think a few things have gone wrong there. One, the scoring around Ryland hasn't necessarily worked out to where he's maybe he hasn't been able to just be a comfortable 3-and-D guy. I think too, some of it's obviously on Ryland's plate and some things that he needs to do better. But I do think your overall point that Houston has evaluated guys who can come in and fill what they want. They've done a really good job of it. And if I'm Bill Self, I think it's super easy for everybody to say, go back to high school guys, multi-year transfers. You try and do that, and then you wind up having some guys leave because they aren't happy with the situation. I still think that's probably the way that they need to go for their bulk of their roster, and they need to get better at evaluating the guys that are just going to plug in and play a very specific role within that. Like next year, you're looking at it, right? And you've got Darren Peterson, who somebody asked earlier about the rebounding and whether I think they were making reference to whether Tiller would help them rebound next year next to Flory. I think that it will also help to have a 6'6" point guard who rebounds next to those guys too. And so I do think that next year's team is probably going to rebound. But when you start looking at what you have there and pieces that you're going to fill in, it's tough to evaluate character in the portal because it's so fast in the way it moves. It's not like recruiting where you can go to somebody's AAU games for months and see what they look like when things aren't going their way, when they are going their way, really get to know them. And so I think that's one of the challenges of getting into the portal, but they're going to have to find some guys to fill in alongside Peterson and Flory and that roster, whether they want to get a stretch 4 in with that group, whether they want to add another wing to that group, probably multiple wings, but they need to do a better job than they have this year. And I think that's a point that's well made.
AB has a question here in the chat about possibly a staff shakeup. We'll touch on that. Plus, where KU goes from here. Only one game left in the regular season. We'll get into that a little bit more. We'll take one more short break, and we'll be right back with more KU basketball talk coming up next.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the Paid Podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. Once again, thanks so much to everybody that's joining us live tonight, late on a Monday night after a big Monday for Kansas against Houston. KU loses 65-59, but a huge shout out and thank you to everybody that's dropped some comments in our YouTube live chat and has interacted with the show. Appreciate you guys so much. And if you haven't already, you should definitely hit that subscribe button, as we're going to have plenty more content in the spring coming your way with basketball heading into the NCAA tournament. And then, of course, spring football, which got underway over the weekend. We're going to be talking more about that coming up later on in the week. So you want to stay subscribed so you're notified when our shows drop and you can check them out. And whenever we go live, because I'm sure we'll be going live a couple more times throughout the spring.
We got to do some – we got to do some baseball too. Did that not look like the most fun party that you've seen all year was Kansas against Omaha? I mean, for those of you who didn't see some of the highlights, look it up on social media, because there were definitely people who did not have ties to Kansas at all who were like, oh my God, look at these guys out here having fun at a baseball game. So I think that may be a fun thing this spring to do as well.
Yeah, and KU baseball is off to a strong start. And yeah, AB in the chat says it. All I will say is this, Kevin: crank the hog. I'll leave it at that. AB did ask a couple questions in the chat, and thank you so much, AB, for being here tonight once again. Asked about a possible shakeup in Bill Self's staff. Russ mentions the possibility of hiring a GM. Bill Self spoke about that at length last week when he was asked a question about it, about whether or not that's something KU would look into. I think it's possible, but I don't know. You enter into this weird situation where the first thing that I think with hiring like a GM or like a manager, I guess, of your roster is like your head coach still needs to be the guy making the final decision. So you're basically hiring someone where you're going to be defining their job role like as they're doing it. And I don't really love that idea, but obviously we're seeing other teams and other sports do it. Duke has done it obviously at the basketball level. North Carolina just hired a GM within the past week or so. So I think it's something that certainly should be considered, but I'll say this. In football, KU has Rob Ianello, who is their sort of GM, or what's his official title?
Yeah, he's GM.
Yeah. I think in football, it makes more sense because of the size of the roster you're dealing with. In basketball, I almost wonder if it's just like you're adding an extra voice in the room just because. I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily see the advantage of it in basketball where the roster size is so small compared to a football.
I see the advantage in it, but I think the head coach has to listen to that person. And I think that's part of the challenge is having somebody come in and immediately have a strong voice when surrounded by Bill Self, who's a very strong personality, and a staff group that's been there quite a while. It wouldn't surprise me if there were a staff change or two. I think it would somewhat surprise me if they hired a GM. And to your point, like I said, I do think overall, like in a vacuum, a GM is a good idea. I think there's so much to navigate now, whether that's, negotiating NIL deals and things like that. You don't want your coach's hands on that, right? I mean, there's a reason that most NFL franchises have somebody different, and it's because you don't want your player mad at your coach because he stiffed him over a deal or didn't give him the contract he wanted, and then that person's in charge of controlling their playing time. And so I think when you look at all of those different things, I think that a GM does make sense in a vacuum, but I just don't know that it would work at Kansas with the way things are currently constructed. It would have to be somebody that Bill Self already knows and that he already respects that voice in the room.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much that really makes a lot of sense to kind of to echo what you said. So I would say maybe not. And also AB mentioned as well. I mean, again, elephant in the room, Bill Self may not be coaching Kansas much more than a couple more years down the road. So you add that factor in as well. And it's kind of, I don't know, it makes less sense, I think, when you think about it that way. And also, I guess for me personally, it's just another one of those things where it increases the professionalism of college sports, which I guess I'm still trying to cling to some of the last vestiges of that not being the case. But the NIL and everything, it already kind of has fully gone that direction. So that's another aspect of it, I guess. And yeah, I think with the coaching staff changes, I mean, I guess assuming KU just totally flames out and loses in the first weekend again, I think you'd be hard pressed to not make a change, right? Like you almost in that position would have to do something to make a change. Just if the season goes that way. But I don't know. Bill Self's had a lot of guys on staff for a long time. You think about guys like Curtis Townsend and Norm Roberts who have been on staff for a very long, very, very long time. I don't know. Would Bill Self be willing to shake things up there? I guess time will only tell if that ends up being the case. If the season maybe does go sort of worst case where Kansas loses in the first weekend again.
Yeah, it would almost be one of those things that you would hear like a mutual decision or so-and-so has decided to step away or retire type of deal. But no, it'll be interesting too, because I do think that next year's team is going to be so differently constructed in terms of the way that it's built. And so a lot of the things that we've looked at the last 2 years where things haven't necessarily gone the way that people wanted them to, you're kind of hitting the reset button almost. And so I don't see, knocking on wood, I don't see the same. There may be different issues, but I don't necessarily see the same issues with next year's team. And so I do think that that's an interesting factor too.
Yeah, I mean, with Darren Peterson, you are going to get a complete 180 from the type of point guard that DeJuan Harris is, and again, that's not I'm not saying that as like to slight DeJuan Harris. I mean, they're just different playing styles, right? And Darren
Yeah.
Peterson obviously has the potential to be more than likely the number one overall pick, possibly. So that would be something to keep an eye on. And yeah, mentioning about relying too much on a star freshman terrifies me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think if you have a star freshman like that and he's surrounded with experienced pieces that can work together, it can be successful. Duke also. Someone mentioned Duke. Russ mentions Duke as well. They're like, yeah, Duke. Duke seems to have a blueprint somewhat figured out. I think at this point. Nav, thank you for your comments as well. We do read them and address them. But we're a Kansas podcast, so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about Kelvin Sampson or anything like that. I mean, yes.
All right, we'll address Nav by addressing a KU comment that was earlier. Somebody asked, I think it was actually James asked, do you really think Kelvin Sampson would let it stand for the kinds of turnovers and sort of sloppy decision making that Kansas just had? No, I think there was a story told a few. I think it was a few games ago where Kelvin Sampson was asked basically, well, what do you do if you have a bad practice? And he's like, we don't let them have a bad practice. so Kelvin he's as good, if not better, than anybody in college basketball at building a culture. And Houston is decidedly Kelvin Sampson's Houston, and they're going to look somewhat similar every single year because he knows exactly what they want. He knows he doesn't care about recruiting rankings in terms of, hey, they'll go out and get a 5-star guy if that's the guy that fits, but they're perfectly happy going out and getting a 3-star guy if they feel like, hey, this is our dude here. And so Houston knows who they are maybe better than anybody in the country, and that's a big part of the reason they're so effective.
Well, and think about it. I mean, Houston really kind of out Kansas in a lot of ways when you think about their toughness, right? I mean, How many times have we seen those types of games play out where, it's a ugly, gritty, grinded out game, and Bill Self's Kansas is the grittier team and finds a way to win. And it seems like Houston has that, whereas Kansas has sort of lost that touch a little bit over the past couple of years, because those are typically, how many times do you see Kansas over the years go on the road against some opponent and win 65-59 like Houston won tonight, but it was Kansas winning it, right? Because they were the tougher team. But yeah, I think Houston definitely has proven that they're one of the better teams. So the comment, you already mentioned it. Houston hasn't lost in regulation at home since joining the Big 12. They've been obviously outstanding and certainly well deserving of winning the Big 12 this year and being a number one seed coming up in the NCAA tournament. So yes, they absolutely deserve all that. And tonight again was a great example of that. I mean, Houston did not play well at all as far as I was watching. They didn't shoot the ball well outside of LJ Cryer, but they got tons of offensive rebounds, which, by the way, that's generally a reflection of hustle. They forced a lot of turnovers. Kansas had some bad turnovers as well, but they forced a lot of turnovers, and that ended up being the difference. I mean, Kansas turns it over late in the game, and also they can't get a defensive rebound, and Houston's able to basically run the clock out late. So, they're deserving of it, of being a 1 seed, being the Big 12 champs this year, certainly. And we'll see how things go from there. But when you look at Kansas, Kevin, they have 1 game left in the regular season. It's going to be senior night. It's going to be on Saturday against Arizona. So quite a bit of time here for Kansas to sort of sit back and try to regroup before they come back out for senior night. The senior night streak for KU, I believe, is at 40 years, maybe 41 years, I think. 1983, I believe, was the last time they lost on senior night, I think.
Yeah.
And so that streak obviously on the line against a good Arizona team. Arizona, by the way, if you are interested at all in doing some early scouting on Arizona, they're playing Arizona State tomorrow night, which we certainly know that's a big rivalry game for them. We know what happened with when they played Arizona State earlier in the year when they had that issue with Bobby Hurley, and they had a couple guys ejected, I think, late in the game. So that's obviously going to be an energized, emotional game for Arizona. Then they'll come play at Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas. We kind of touched on it at the top of the show. We talked about it in the preview. You know, Kansas could lose this game tonight against Houston, which they ultimately did, and you could still maybe feel okay or feel maybe even better a little bit. I guess just point blank, do you feel that way heading into Arizona? Do you feel any better, or do you feel the same based off what you saw tonight?
Yeah, I felt like the energy was a lot better. And like I said, there were several moments tonight where Houston was in a spot to pull away, and Kansas kind of traded punches and hung around. And it sounds so weird to say because I'm not calling it a moral victory or anything like that. All I'm saying is that I do think it was. I do think it was a relatively solid showing in terms of, what's the good teams win, great teams cover. Well, Kansas did not win, but it did cover. So that part, if you're one of those people, that was a good deal. But no, I do think I just went totally dark because my chocolate lab just knocked over my light. So
I was wondering if like your power went out.
No. So it's been that kind of night, I guess. But no, like I said, I think that you have 5 days to kind of heal up, which Kansas is going to need to do because that was a really physical game. It's senior night. I'm interested to see the fan reaction to the outgoing seniors, guys like DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, Zeke Mayo. I'm interested to see what that looks like. But ultimately, Kansas has played pretty well at home. And, I think that coming off of this game where you did have a pretty strong showing from an effort, energy, competitiveness standpoint, I hesitate to say they're trending in the right direction, Nick, but I do think that they're not trending in the wrong direction, I guess would maybe be the hesitant way to put that.
AB with the comment, I think that pretty much explains everything you need to know about Arizona, which is Caleb Love will either get 30 or 3, no in between. We'll see what kind of game he has. And Joseph also mentioned about Caleb Love is familiar with Kansas from his time at his previous stop. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of with you. Like, coming away from this game against Houston, I mentioned it. I don't think Houston played well. They out-hustled Kansas. They got more offensive rebounds, and they forced turnovers. But I think Kansas, Diggy Coit was obviously a bright spot. I'm worried about the guards beyond that. But Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams, I think, both had strong games. So I don't know. I think if you can get a little bit more out of those other 3 guys, being DeJuan Harris, Zeke Mayo, and Rylan Griffin, and Hunter Dickinson continues to play at the level he's playing at, and Diggy is your spark either off the bench or maybe if he does get into the starting lineup, if he continues to be that guy, then yeah, I think Kansas absolutely can find a way to win that game at home and continue that senior night streak and head into postseason play with a win to cap off the regular season. So, but it's not going to be easy. Arizona is certainly a quality team. They are coming off a pretty bad loss to Iowa State on the road in Ames. So I guess that's something to keep in mind. But when you look at KenPom, they're top 20 in both offense and defense. So it'll be
another team, Nick, that offensive rebounds very well. So I'm sure
that is true. They are 13th in the country in offensive rebound rate. So
that will be a point of emphasis this week, I would guess.
I am almost certain that it will be a point of emphasis, that and taking care of the ball. Because I mean, seriously, if Kansas even just does those 2 things a little bit better, they probably win tonight. They probably win tonight if they do either of those things just a little bit better. Which again is certainly annoying when you think about kind of how the game ended with Houston getting a number of offensive rebounds and Kansas turning it over a couple of times down the stretch that hurt them in the end. So, Kevin, listen, it's after 11:15 p.m. on a Monday night. Again, thanks so much everybody that's here with us. But what do you say we wrap this one up? You got any final thoughts for our good listeners?
No, that sounds good, especially since we will be at football practice bright and early in the morning, and so pay attention to the Pay Heat Twitter account. We tried to put out some pictures and videos and everything from the first practice, so some really cool stuff out there. Daniel Highshaw was good seeing
he's
him
back
out there.
Yeah. By the way, he's back.
He looked really good. And so when you look at that, when you look at the wide receivers, Emmanuel Henderson, some of those guys, it's going to be a fun spring. I think to be a Kansas football fan, just because there are so many new and moving pieces that you'll want to keep track of, and you can keep track of them by following the Pay Heat Twitter account. So
there you go.
And swing over and do that.
Shout out to AB for shouting out the sponsors, Emprise and Home Field. Shout out to those guys as well. And yes, absolutely be sure to keep an eye on our social media at Payheat KCSN on Twitter, getting some stuff out there from practices. And we're going to be talking all things KU football on a show coming up later this week. So be on the lookout on your feed on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN and wherever you get your audio platforms as well, because we're going to be talking all things KU football to sort of kick off the spring. They had their first practice on Sunday, yesterday, if you're joining us here live, and then we'll be talking about them more coming up later this week. So be on the lookout for that. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe, drop a comment. You can always comment after the fact as well. Plenty of ways to join the conversation. Follow us on social media as well, at Flaherty KCSN, at Nick Springer 29, at Payheat KCSN. Tons of ways to stay in contact with the show. Once again, huge thank you. I mean, it's like I said, it's 11:20 p.m. on a Monday night, and we've got people in here still commenting and joining us. So thank you guys so much for tuning in for another live edition of the show. And we're going to be back very soon. More KU football talk, and more KU basketball talk coming up as well, with KU taking on Arizona. So be on the lookout for all that good stuff and plenty more. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.